Okay, welcome APUSH students to chapter 23. This is the Great Depression. I'm certainly focusing on the causes of the Great Depression and FDR's New Deal, first New Deal and second New Deal. Oops. Okay, early responses to the Depression. I don't know why that is in the way. All right, Herbert Hoover. You got to remember that during the 20s, we had 3 Republican presidents in a row. They all support businesses, as you can imagine. And Herbert Hoover's old school, pull you up by your bootstraps kind of guy, kind of the American idea throughout our history. And he believed that volunteerism was the best way to alleviate the problems of depressions. Now, remember, we've had depressions in American history before. This isn't the first one. But people don't realize, and Hoover certainly doesn't realize exactly how bad this one is going to be. And we know that he gets kind of a negative image for not taking enough action, and he doesn't. He believes that the businesses will do this themselves. That's what volunteerism is that the businesses will help their workers and help their people because it's good for business. Now, one thing that he does that you need to know is the Smoot-Hawley tariff. What it did was raise tariff rates on other countries to protect local businesses. The idea being that we want Ford and GM to stay in business, so we don't want them to have to lay off workers because of foreign competition. So we'll raise the tariffs, and that'll protect jobs at home and protect the people at home. Unfortunately, there were retaliatory tariffs from other countries, and so Ford and GM and places like that are no longer being able to sell their goods to Europe and other countries. So, doesn't help anything, and you get unemployment. You got the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. So understand that Hoover is doing something. It's just not enough. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation gives federal loans to businesses to help them out. It's kind of like bailing them out, sort of like what we saw recently under Obama's administration, his bailouts of the banks. However, it's spending too little money too cautiously is simply not enough to combat this travesty that's enveloped not only the United States of America, but the world. Well, it's being kind of stubborn here. If we have to, we'll do it like this, maybe. Okay. Let me pause this, guys, and see if I can get this to work a little bit better. I'm sorry. Okay, well, not exactly sure what the issue is here, but it is not working. So my apologies, but we're going to push on and do the best we can here, okay? All right. So we know that Hoover's not doing a very good job. That's certainly going to affect him in the next election, which you can see is this huge map covering all of the stuff you need to write down. But we know a little bit about the Bonus Army, and that the Bonus Army was a group of World War I veterans who had been promised a bonus for their service in the Great War. However, that bonus was not to be paid out until the 40s. And these guys want it now. They believe that they deserve it, and that because of how hard the times are, they need it for their families. And so they do a peaceful march on Washington, and they assemble, some 15,000 of them assemble outside of the Capitol. And in a sad moment in U.S. history, Herbert Hoover orders the army, the new army, the young army under one Douglas MacArthur, to dispense the old Bonus Army. And basically you get some tear gas and stuff like that. And there's a couple of accidental fires and a couple of people die. It does not play well in the media, as you can imagine. And it's going to be another major reason that Herbert Hoover is going to get just crushed by FDR in the next election. As you can see, FDR is going to defeat Hoover with 472 electoral votes to a mere 59. That is a landslide, as you can see, very blue America there. Unemployment and bank failures continued throughout late 1932 and early 1933. Waiting on basically FDR to get into office. Now, the first thing that FDR does when he gets into office, and he puts forth this plan called the first 100 days. And all the presidents since FDR are kind of judged by what they do in their first 100 days. And they set up these first 100 days plans of things that they're going to do. Well, the first thing that FDR does is he takes on the banking issue. So he's got to go out and he does something very important called the fireside chats. He uses the radio, the very important radio. He's going to reach it. He's going to use it to reach Americans. And he is going to basically come on the radio at the same time every night. And he's going to talk personally with very everyday language to the Americans to get them to trust the banks. He's going to create a banking holiday. He's going to close the banks for about 5 days. And he's going to have federal teams come in and make sure that the banks are good for service, because the banks have been doing some shady things prior to the stock market crash of 1929. You had all this speculation. Banks were investing people's monies in the stock market and losing. And then, people would come to get their money out of the bank and they didn't have their money and banks were going bankrupt. And if a bank went bankrupt and people were losing their monies, all this going in with the unemployment that was rising was just too much. And so Roosevelt's got to fix the banks. He creates a brains trust, a group of just smart intellectual people to help him. It's sort of like a George Washington model, where George Washington surrounded himself with brilliant people. His ego was not so large that he couldn't, be surrounded by people even smarter than himself. FDR is very similar. He wants the best and the brightest working on this problem. As you can see, we get our first female cabinet member, Frances Perkins. So that's a progressive move by FDR. And in his 100 days, it's going to focus on 4 major areas. The banks, which I told you, it was the first thing that he dealt with. Agriculture, businesses, and unemployment. And these are all things that we're going to talk about. Remember, the agriculture is struggling because they have competition now. During World War I, there was no farming going on in Europe, and they were buying all their food from America. Well, it's been a while, and now they're back up and running. And so America has competition from European farms. So American farmers are not doing nearly as good. All right, so this all plays in together. All right. My internet is a little laggy. Okay. All right, so like I said, banking holiday. He pushes through this Emergency Banking Act. He tells the people in the fireside chats that a bank cannot be open unless it is qualified and it is a sound bank that they can trust, that they don't have to worry about losing their money to. And that's very important to the Americans. And he goes even further and does something even better. It gets the Glass-Steagall Act passed, which creates the FDIC, which is still in effect today. In this time period, it insured bank deposits up to $2,500. So you were guaranteed to get your money. These days, I think when I was a kid, it was a $100,000 guarantee on your account. These days, I think it's $250,000 on your account. So if you're richer than that, you better open up another banking account so you'll get that insurance. All right. So what's he do for agriculture and manufacturing? In agriculture, he initiates the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. What he's trying to fix, to rectify, is overproduction of farm goods. Farmers are simply making too much food. And when you have an oversupply of something, the prices are too low. So the farmers aren't making enough money, enough profit to pay their mortgages, which is hurting the banks. It's all connected. But the only way a farmer can make money is by their crops. And so they couldn't convince. Earlier, they had tried to tell the farmers, oh, stop producing as much. But the farmers were unwilling to do that. But under the AAA, they actually pay farmers, subsidize them. They pay farmers not to grow crops. That helped the huge, large farmers, but it didn't really do much for the small-time farmers. Passes the National Recovery Administration. Industries agreed on prices and production quotas. Um, we're trying to fix things. It's not. It's sort of an attack on capitalism, but it's seen to be something that's necessary. And really, people in America are wanting somebody who's taking action. There's a flurry of stuff going on under Roosevelt. He looks to be a man with a plan, and he is taking action. However, both the Agricultural Adjustment Act and the National Recovery Administration were deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So those are going to get wiped off the board. As you know, that happens with some of his plans. Federal emergency relief programs. How is he going to put money in people's pockets? There are a couple different ways. The PWA, the Public Works Administration, they're building stuff. America is large. It needs an improved infrastructure, schools, dams, airports, bridges, roads, all these things. Give people jobs. And when they have jobs, they have money. And when they have money, they'll spend it. And when they spend it in businesses, businesses will flourish. And so that's the idea. The Civil Works Administrators, you got things like the CCC, providing jobs, basically the Civilian Conservation Corps. Now, the Civilian Conservation Corps was just for young men, 18 to 24, with the idea being that these young men don't have families of their own and that they would send that money back to mom, dad, brothers, and sisters, not to a wife and their own children. That was really what they were looking for out of that. But essentially, you can see that public relief provided through creation of jobs. It's job creation here. There is an enormous housing crisis going on as well. 500,000 families lost their homes. They weren't able to pay the banks, and the banks repoed them. But for the banks, you can repo that house. But if you are unable to sell it to anybody because they can't buy, then the banks are out their money as well. It's a lose-lose situation for people. So you get the Federal Housing Administration, which is still in effect today, the FHA. It helped regulate interest rates for mortgages. Many of you, when you go to buy your first home, you will use an FHA loan. There are some other types that you can use, but a lot of times, at least in my experience, FHA loans have a lower interest rate. Okay. All right. 1933 to 1935, you get the New Deal. The first New Deal, and you're going to have a lot of critics of the New Deal. You remember, all of these things that I just talked about with the CCC and the WPA and all that, and the FDIC, those are New Deal programs. But FDR is going to get criticized by Democrats and Republicans both. For the Republicans, he is doing too much. He's hurting capitalism. He's socialistic. Too communistic, maybe. For people on the left, his Democrats, some of them are more radical than him and don't believe he's going far enough. They're attacking him on not doing enough. Some of his critics on the left, Francis Townsend, which is the older guy that you see in the picture there, Townsend says, hey, we need to give seniors $200 a month, and that this will help protect them and it will help the economy because they won't be a burden on the economy anymore. But remember, if you're giving them $200 a month, that money has to come from somewhere else. So you have a redistribution of wealth, which is very socialistic. But this idea does help create something that called Social Security, which is probably the greatest legacy of the New Deals. Huey Long, you got to know this guy, kind of a interesting fellow from Louisiana, pretty radical. He has a program called Share Our Wealth. I think it's something like he wants every American family to get like $2,500 a month or something. But again, that's going to be taking money from rich people and giving it to middle class and poor people. Pretty radical. Huey Long would actually end up getting assassinated because of it. 1 second. Let me pause one more time. Okay, so back to business here. All right, second New Deal. The first New Deal doesn't work. Keep that in mind. It does not get us out of the Great Depression. And so FDR has to come up with the second New Deal. And the first New Deal focused kind of on economic recovery and providing a safety net for people. But now we're getting some more movement here. The Wagner Act and Social Security is part of the second New Deal. Huge deal. The Wagner Act, workers had the right to join unions. That's important because in this time period when there's so much unemployment, you have 25% nationwide unemployment. You have cities with 50 to 70% unemployment. If you were to strike, you will be replaced in an instant. And businesses are cutting wages and stuff like that because times are hard. And so there's no protection for the workers. So under the Wagner Act, workers have the right to join unions and they can't be fired for joining a union. There were companies that would hire people and they'd have to sign a piece of paper, a contract saying that they would not join a union. And that was how they would get the job. And so basically FDR comes in and tries to offer this protection to them. Social Security Act provided pensions for retired workers, compensation for the unemployed people and disabled workers. If dad loses his leg in an accident, the family doesn't, it doesn't destroy the family because he's going to get some money from the government. The family will be protected. New Deal liberalism. Classical liberalism was associated with free markets. New Deal liberalism is going to be more like, well, the government's got to do what the government's got to do to protect the people. All right. All right, from reform to stalemate. So we've been making changes, but now we're going to get a little headbutting going on here. 1936 election, Roosevelt wins large again. You get the WPA still going, Works Progress Administration, employs over 8 million people, all this construction that we've been talking about. But FDR wants more, and he needs the Supreme Court to be more sympathetic to him. There are too many Republicans on there that, ban things like the AAA and some of his earlier programs. So the worst thing that FDR probably does during his administration is something called the court packing plan. And what he wants to do is he wants to appoint a brand new Supreme Court justice for every judge on the court who was over 70 years old. Because remember, the Supreme Court justice members serve for life. This would mean that he would get an additional 6 judges. And those would be handpicked by him. They would support his programs. Very powerful. It was overwhelmingly rejected, and it cost FDR a little bit of street credit with some Americans. It felt like too much of a power grab to some of the Americans. The Roosevelt recession, FDR cut back on spending due to an improved economy. The economy got a little bit better. Still not out of the depression, but he cuts back on spending. Keynesian economics is also important in this time period. Keynes is he's one, there's always economists. There's lots of economists and they have different ideas. Keynes is the one that FDR follows his philosophy. And Keynesian economics says that the government must spend money in a depression to prime the pump and stimulate the economy. Essentially, you have to spend your way out of a depression. That the worst thing you can do is go into saving mode and not spending money. You need money to circulate. The same, would go for people at home who could afford it. Now, obviously, if you are living paycheck to paycheck, you can't, you don't have money to save anyway. But if you're middle class and you're hoarding your money because times aren't as good, that's bad. They need you to spend the money to help the economy. All right, New Deal's impact on society. Organized labor, union membership increases to 23%. Here you see a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt, the greatest first lady of all time. You get women in the New Deal, how the New Deal affects women. Gender inequities persist, but Eleanor Roosevelt is going to step in and be a voice for women and for minorities. She is what all first ladies will be measured against from her time on. I don't think that we've ever had one on her level. But she's the model that first ladies typically try to follow. Wherever FDR wasn't, she was. If he forgot a group of people, whether it be women or minorities, she was there. In this time period, nothing much different. Women are still being paid less than men for the same jobs. And again, we talked about this, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, don't even allow women to join. So there are some inequities there in the impact of the New Deal. African Americans, segregation, lynchings persist throughout this time period. AAA, when it was in effect in the beginning before it was unconstitutional, didn't really help sharecroppers in the South. Remember, it really only helped the large farmers, and that's certainly not sharecroppers. Indians. John Collier was the commissioner of Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they have the Indian Reorganization Act, which was kind of known as the Indian New Deal. What it did was reverse the assimilation policy of the Dawes Act. Remember 1887, I think, the Dawes Severalty Act, and that had stolen a lot of native land. Under the Indian Reorganization Act, many natives were given religious freedom and semi-sovereign nation status. So, you get Cherokee Nation or Choctaw Nation. You get those things now. So they have semi-sovereign. So they're a nation within a nation, if you will. Famous picture here of a refugee camp. Here's the Dust Bowl over here. Mexicans struggle in this time period because most Mexicans are working in agricultural jobs, and agriculture is struggling. You get the impact of the Dust Bowl, and the Dust Bowl is going to cause thousands to leave Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas, which were the areas hit hardest by the Dust Bowl, and they headed to California because California seemed to be a place with opportunities, with jobs. The Californians give them the name Okies. Didn't matter if you were from Oklahoma or not. Anybody who showed up in their jalopy, which is what the vehicles were called, think Beverly Hills Hillbillies if you've seen it. They load up everything they own on the back of their vehicle, and they drive out to California hoping for a better life. Dust Bowl's pretty bad. We'll watch a little video on the Dust Bowl. I mean, you have a dust storm that covers 1,500 miles in one case, and cows are suffocating to death. It doesn't kill a bunch of people, but it is there are a lot of health issues associated with it, and it destroys farms. So the Dust Bowl couldn't have really been a worse time for the Dust Bowl to show up. All right, another of the alphabet soups of the New Deal, the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's a big one. The TVA focused on flood control and the development of hydroelectric dams to help electricity spread. As you can see there on the map, that's Tennessee and surrounding states. So it went beyond even Tennessee itself. Provided a significant amount of electricity to farms, homes, and factories. So we know the importance of that. And the Rural Electrification Administration provided electricity to rural areas. For a while there, electricity had been something that was in the city. You didn't really have it in the country, but electricity is spreading now. You also get the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam, and it was the largest electricity producer in the world at the time. All right, how did the New Deal affect the arts? Over 20,000 artists, musicians, and writers were employed. These are people that have a skill, a special skill, I guess, but maybe the first thing to go in times of hardship. But they're going to get jobs creating things for the government, artistic things for the government. So about 20,000 of them employed. Now, New Deal's impact on society here. Legacies of the New Deal. Millions of dollars are paid into Social Security. Millions of people pay taxes into Social Security. And Social Security it don't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. Don't touch Social Security if you want to get elected. Social Security is something that Americans expect after they've worked their entire lives. Their last few years on this earth, they want to have some rest. 1/3 of the population received government assistance during the New Deal. Obviously, that's a pretty large number. And that the New Deal was criticized by both the right and the left. Again, the Republicans criticized it for doing too much, and it was too much government in people's everyday lives. The left criticized it for not doing enough, for not redistributing more wealth into the hands of the working class and the lower middle class. You also get a change in voting patterns. Unions are going to vote Democrat. Blacks, who had always voted Republican, all right, since Lincoln, had always voted Republican, are now voting Democrat, which for the most part they do today as well. And many immigrants who are coming in, or who are mostly going to be working class people, are also going to vote Democrat. So this is a huge voting shift in the parties. Okay, so make sure you see the recap there, the bonus army and effects there. Let's see if there's anything here that we didn't cover. Good enough. No, I think we got all that, guys. Okay. Again, you're still advised to read your book, at least skim through it, reading it pretty quickly. And then this should hopefully pull some things into focus for you. And we will spend this week on the Great Depression, see what we can come up with. Okay, guys. Thank you.